It's Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, and this is Monster Mondays, presented to you by Film Seizure. Of course, you can catch new episodes of Film Seizure with myself and Jason Oliver each and every Wednesday, but Mondays, they are for me to talk about monster movies. It's hard to stay away from those Universal classics, isn't it? With so many films and so many iconic monsters in each one, I could probably dedicate every other week to Universal and then do Godzilla movies in the in-between just to be able to cover about 14 months of content. So it should come as no surprise that we're here again with the classics. This time, it's a latter-day monster of Universal's that gained classic status relatively quickly. The creature from the Black Lagoon. The creature, who also goes by the name of Gill-man, came along in the mid-1950s when science fiction was starting to really take the place of horror monsters of older lore. Gone were vampires and in came giant bugs, giant spiders, giant reptiles, and so forth. Universal had basically started moving away from what put them on the map to begin with, Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Wolfman. Part of the reason for moving away from there was that they had basically exhausted the classic monsters usage. Audiences after World War II weren't quite as much interested in the European creatures as much as they were with this new atomic age of horrors created by mankind, ourselves. Additionally, there was a little more interest in thrillers. The Inner Sanctum franchise was doing pretty well for Universal, and they could crank those out with minimum makeup effects and maybe more limited budgets. 1945 saw the release of House of Dracula. This was one of Universal's greatest hits types of films that brought all their big monsters together in one pretty sloppy story. I see it as a closing of a chapter in Universal's horror prominence because their next classic monster, Gill-man, would not come along for 9 whole years. The in-between years were mostly spent with whatever Inner Sanctum movies or other easy creature features they could crank out, while also primarily relying on heavily on duos like Abbott and Costello doing comedic horror movies featuring some of the great classic monsters. I have many issues with those Abbott and Costello movies, but now is not the time for that. The creature from the Black Lagoon was able to bring back the classic black and white monster movie with grandiose music scores reminiscent of those older classics of the 30s and early 40s. What I think it does so well, though, is mix in the modern almost effortlessly. The movie begins with a quick history lesson of Earth coming into being and life emerging from the oceans over the course of the planet's near 5 billion year history. In 1954, a relative B-movie monster flick had more accurate scientific information in 2 minutes of screen time than what some organizations try to teach and preach to people in 2019. Ain't that something? But anyway, as the movie begins, an expedition finds a unique fossil of what looks like a hand with webbed fingers. This brings the expedition leader, Dr. Maya, to a former student of his, Dr. David Reed, and his girlfriend and colleague, Kay Lawrence. They go to the Amazon aboard the boat Rita to see what other bones can be found to complete the fossil's body. They don't find many fossils, but they do one better. They discover the creature in a lagoon. In preparation to sort of protect himself, but also possibly financially benefit from this, a greedy doctor by the name of Williams is sure to show off that he has a harpoon with him and knows how to use it. Williams and Reed go into the lagoon, and the men collect some more samples from the base of the lagoon while the creature kind of stalks them from underwater. For the first 25 minutes of the movie, before we actually see the creature's face, we've seen his hand coming out of the water and his point of view as he murders one of Dr. Maya's men. But here we see that he really is part fish and part person. He swims underneath the water pretty effortlessly, has no problem breathing under there, both on surface and in the water. After Williams and Reed come back to the boat, the scientists all work to take readings on the samples that are gathered to see if this is the same sediment that was found with that fossilized hand. Kay decides to go for a swim on her own because she wanted to see what Reed saw while he was underwater. However, seeing Kay, the Gill-man takes a particular like to her, and he follows her as she swims through the lagoon, and while she swims across the top, he swims on his back under her watching. It's a really neat scene. Well, maybe I find it especially neat because I can't swim, and these two are expert swimmers making the shot work, so I don't know. It's a neat scene, that's all I know. Kay returns to the boat before the creature can grab her and take her to his underwater love cave, if you will. As he continues to pursue her, he gets trapped in the net next to the Rita. When they pull the net up, they see a hole ripped in it, and what's more, a piece of his claw has been left behind. Reed and Williams go back into the lagoon to figure out what did that to the net and try to figure out what creature that might belong to and if it's related to the fossil that they had found previously. Reed wants to take photos to study this creature in its natural habitat, but it seems Williams wants a trophy as he's making sure his harpoon is loaded and ready to fire as soon as they see the creature. They do find the creature, but with Williams shooting his harpoon at him, it really only scares the creature off. While everyone is looking over the photographed evidence that Reed got of the Gill-man, the creature himself comes aboard the Rita and grabs one of the guys on the boat and drags him off into the lagoon, ultimately killing him. They try a few things to capture the creature. They use stuff that basically stuns fish in the water, causing it to rise to the surface, and a few other chemical options to try to capture it. Williams makes it very clear he wants to capture the creature and take it back for proof of its existence, really basically to make a buck off of it. If nothing else, to make sure that nobody thinks he's a crank. The creature avoids their various attempts and tries to get back onto the Rita, but is frightened off by a lit lantern. As it swims away, it gets into the drugged water and collapses. So Williams and Reed follow the creature into his cave, and there the creature ultimately finds Kay and tries to make off with her, only to pass out from the drug. So we have the creature in a cage on the Rita. However, that doesn't last too long before he busts out. Luckily, a busted lantern on him causes him to go up in flames and forced to retreat. Now, Reed pleads with Williams to leave and return with a proper team that would be basically better equipped to deal with the creature. Williams, now nearly obsessed, despite a handful of people from the Rita having been killed now, only backs down from the order to stay behind to capture the thing, but Reed ultimately convinces everyone else to return home and come back later. As they leave, they discover the creature has downed a heavy tree branch to block their escape. When Reed tries to tie the winch around the tree, Williams goes after the Gill-man, but is ultimately killed in the ensuing fight with the Gill-man. While Reed is able to free the ship from the downed tree, the creature sneaks aboard the Rita and snatches Kay, taking her to his cave dwelling. The remaining men from the Rita save her by shooting the creature multiple times until it collapses back into the water and seemingly sinks lifeless to the bottom of the lagoon. Now, a few things that I want to mention before I get to my 3 likes here. First, the last paragraph is a pretty big climax to this movie. But it doesn't really happen until after a relatively slow burn, with the interaction between the crew of the Rita and the creature being kind of sparse to this point. That's kind of a classic Universal monster movie tenet, I guess, is to kind of have the slow burn that ends very quickly in the last few minutes. On top of that, for as slow of a burn as it's been, that climax, like I said, happens super fast. So it's literally the last 5 minutes of an 80-minute movie. For a Beauty and a Beast type of story, the Beauty and the Beast are hardly seen on screen together. And I think that's often a misconception with a lot of the Universal classics like that. Thirdly, while the Gill-man was played by someone else during the sequences out of the water, the stunt performer playing the creature was Recall Browning. Browning was a bit of an underwater specialist. He did lots of swimming maneuvers while in full creature costume, and the only person to play the creature in more than one movie as well. He did basically all of the underwater scenes for the two sequels that came after this movie. Most notably, in his long Hollywood resume, Browning directed every underwater shot in the James Bond film Thunderball, and due to that underwater footage, Thunderball won the Academy Award for Best Visual Effects. While I don't think he ever saw the award firsthand, let alone be allowed to accept it on the behalf of the Thunderball production team, I'm comfortable saying Browning is indeed an Academy Award winner. All right, so for my 3 likes, I have to start with the bathing beauty herself, Julie Adams as Kay. While she is not totally sewn into the scientific side of the story, she is not just a girlfriend character either. She's there as the only woman, aside from the name of the boat, for being a colleague of her boyfriend's. I mean, she contributes to some of the discussion and generally seems to be able to hold her own on a boat full of various types of dudes. This was still the 50s, and gender roles were still fairly cleanly defined in Hollywood. The decade did find several women stepping into these science fiction movies and contributing to the science of the movie, though. This is a time of seeming progression from where female characters were in the decades prior to this film's release. Now, Adams is incredibly likable in this movie, too. Not to mention, it might be hard for anyone to find a woman that looks that good in a white one-piece bathing suit, at least from where I'm concerned. She makes that bathing suit look great. Aside from the bride and the Bride of Frankenstein, there is likely no other female character as memorable or as iconic in the Universal Classics run than Adams herself. What's even better is that she loved talking about this movie and meeting fans at various conventions and screenings basically until the day she died. She only died just a few months ago, but was extremely active anywhere fans of classic horror movies could be found, online, at conventions, various screenings, etc. I always thought of her as an ambassador for the genre. I don't think I ever saw a picture of her in her later years where she wasn't beaming with joy at meeting her fans. And there are many people who don't like being remembered for only one role or one moment in an otherwise very long career. But from a fan's perspective, it is wonderful to see her embrace that for over 60 years. Next, there is a simplicity to this movie that I really love. Yes, I realize it is for budget sense that the movie takes place entirely on a boat, basically parked in a lagoon. However, it helps create a little extra atmosphere of terror when you realize that the boat is literally trapped. The creature blocked its only exit, and what are you going to do? I mean, try to swim your way through that yourself? I mean, while there's a monster in the water looking to possibly kill or eat you? Yeah, no, I don't think you're going to find any other way of being except for screwed in this situation. Not only are you basically stuck in a seemingly claustrophobic scenario, but it creates a very finite world that you can easily understand as an audience member. You're either on the boat or in the water. It seems silly, but there's something to be said about the simplicity of only a few settings that can help you wrap your brain around the situation or the place that you are in, and basically be able to enter the movie as a casual viewer too. It's not something that I think I can easily explain, but it feels a little more natural to me that it's so limited in its scope, if that makes any sense. Finally, the design of the Gill-man is awesome. The design was the creation of Millicent Patrick, who was the first female animator at Walt Disney Studios. She sadly wouldn't get the credit she deserved until over 50 years later, because makeup artist Bud Westmore took sole credit and basically single-handedly downplayed Patrick's role as the primary designer of the creature. It's an utter shame, but there are some very good stories out there about Millicent Patrick. Google her and you'll see all sorts of cool things about her and the life that she led. Anyway, the suit basically covers the actors completely. But the dorsal fin, the shape of the head, the intricate detail of the scales, and the almost sectional body design are just simply beautiful. It looks almost real, like this is some sort of actual undersea creature. I've always said that The Mummy is my favorite film in the Universal Classics cycle, but the Gill-man is very likely my actual favorite monster of the entire run. This movie is very inspirational to a lot of other monster movies that would come later. While it's certainly derivative of other movies of its time and certainly of Beauty and the Beast, it's got a hell of a standing in the monster fan community. Hell, it's what inspired Guillermo del Toro to make The Shape of Water, another movie I will eventually talk about on this show, and that's for sure. But that movie ultimately ended up winning the Best Picture Oscar a couple of years back. So add that to the list of reasons why this movie is an extremely solid entry in 1950s horror and sort of science fiction, and perhaps one of the best Universal monster movies ever made. So that wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. Until next week, I'll see you later. And don't forget to check out new episodes of Film Seizure every Wednesday morning and a new installment of Monster Mondays each Monday afternoon on filmseizure.com. Also, be sure to check out new posts on my website, bmovieanima.com, each and every Friday morning.